So I'm not going to be able to do this, but because we wouldn't have enough time. But if I asked you to name your top 5 favorite movies, top 5 favorite songs, and top 5 favorite books, I want you just to try to think really quickly, movies, songs, and books, what those favorites would be. Now I wish I could just write them all down, put them on a board or something, but here's what I would guess. I would guess that there's kind of a common thread. If I were to put all of those together, I think one common thread in those would be that a lot of your favorite movies, books, songs, there's something in there about someone liking somebody else. There's something in there about romance, like a husband that's singing to his wife, or there's something in a song about, trying to, somebody I love doesn't love me back, or maybe it's a movie. Think about this, every single Disney movie, I dare you to try to think of one. Every single Disney movie, there's something about romance in there, isn't there? What? Is that an exception?
No. Well, yeah,
that's an exception to the rule. Because when I think of Disney movies, okay, so I'm thinking of Little Mermaid, Snow White, I'm thinking of those things, and all the ones I can think of, there's some, a boy likes a girl likes a boy, maybe it's the princess and she likes a guy that's, a commoner, but then they end up getting together. Or think about your favorite song, maybe not Weird Al songs, but normal songs, country, rock, whatever is your genre. There's something about someone liking somebody else. And so I was just trying to think of all of the pop music that I could think of, favorite books, favorite movies, and that's something that's like a common theme in all of them. There's something about a love story in probably, I don't know what percentage, but a really high percentage of movies, books, songs. What do you think is the average cost of a wedding? Just guess what the average wedding costs. Anybody got a guess?
Way too much.
20,000?
How much?
20,000?
Okay, you're close. The average wedding. Now listen, whenever someone says average, that means that there's people who are way, way higher than this and way, way lower than this. But the average wedding costs $33,900. Now, whenever you get out of college, you'll probably be doing good to bring home $33,900 in a year. Like take-home pay, bringing home $33,900. So that would be what you would make in an entire year. That's what the average person spends on weddings. So venue, photographer, cake. I couldn't, whenever Christy and I got married, I had never even thought about, I never even heard that wedding cakes would cost a lot of money. When we got married, when I thought of ordering a cake, I thought of going to Walmart and flipping through the book, or flipping through the book to the wedding section and ordering a cake for $30 or $40. That's what I thought, because I had never even heard of wedding cakes costing what did ours cost?
It was a gift, but it would have been $800.
$800. That just blows my mind that you would spend $800 on something that is going to be gone in 30 minutes.
300 people.
Well, how many Walmart sheet cakes could you have bought for $800? Like 50. But $33,900 is the average wedding cost. So romance is big business. I mean, think about all the movies that include some kind of romantic twist in them, even books that aren't about romance, or even movies that aren't about romance. There's something in there about this person likes this other person. I mean, you can't live in American culture without just breathing that in. Romance is all around us, and not just on February 14th. It's all around us. Why do you think that is? That media of all kinds, you're looking at somebody's Instagram page or whatever. Why is it that you think that romantic love is such a big part of our culture? And not just our culture, I bet it's part of other cultures too. Why do you think that is?
Built that way.
Okay.
People are lonely.
What?
People are lonely.
Okay, so maybe people are lonely. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but God was the one, and now I know I've said this in here before, but that God was the one who invented sex. God was the one who created male and God created gender. God created male and female. God created the hormones and the chemicals that make us male and female. He created those hormones that generate and that fuel romantic desire. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but God, since God created us and wired us in the way He did and created us in His image, the fact that there is such a thing as romantic love is His idea. It's not like, Adam and Eve were in the garden and then they ate from the tree and sinned, and then after sin they discovered something that God hadn't thought of before. No, I mean, from the very first chapter of the Bible, it says God created the male and female. So gender is in the very first chapter of the Bible. And then in chapter 2, the second chapter of the Bible, it says, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So there's 1,189 chapters in the entire Bible. Gender is in chapter 1, and marriage and sexuality is in chapter 2. And then we don't see sin until we get to chapter 3. So romance, marriage, all of that was part of the perfect world that God made before sin even entered the world. So romance was God's idea. This isn't something that popular culture has made up. Now, of course, popular culture can twist anything that God makes. But the fact is that it was His idea. God was the one who created us this way. And I'm sure that all of you, pretty sure I can safely say this, all of you on some level are interested in somebody. Okay? I'm pretty sure I can say that either there's someone you like, there's someone you're interested in, there's someone who you hope will notice you, there's someone who likes you. I mean, that just like Jonathan said, that's the way God created us. God created us with gender. He created us with these desires, and there's nothing shameful about that. Liking somebody else is nothing to be ashamed about. Thinking about marriage is nothing to be ashamed about. Anticipating being with someone and being married, there's nothing shameful or dirty or anything about that. God was the one who created us that way. He created us with that longing and that desire. Just like Olivia said, maybe they're lonely. Well, God created us with that desire to be with somebody. Now, of course, there's exceptions to the rule because not everybody gets married or even wants to be in that kind of relationship. There's some people who are single all their lives, and I respect that, but in general, God created us with this desire to like somebody of the opposite sex. That's just how God wired us. So it's nothing that God is ashamed of, or that God turns His face away from, or God wishes you wouldn't like somebody, because that's the way He made you. God was the one who invented all of that. And there's one book of the Bible that is, now, There are books of the Bible where romantic love is talked about, but there's one book of the Bible that is just about romantic love and nothing else, and that's the book of Song of Solomon. The book of Song of Solomon is nothing but love poetry from a man to a woman and vice versa, from a woman to a man. It's only 8 chapters long. It's not a huge book, but the whole thing is about romantic love. Now, Christians differ on how to interpret that book. I mean, so you read through it, and it's obviously a man talking to the woman he loves and a woman talking to the man she loves. And some Christians think, well, maybe it's not, technically about romantic love. Maybe it's picturing Jesus' relationship with the church and how the church should love and desire Jesus and how Jesus loves and does. And that's a fine interpretation. But no matter how you interpret the book of Song of Solomon, it's obvious that the language in there is romantic love. I don't know how many of you have ever read Song of Solomon, but it's love poetry. Let me just read you just a couple of lines from Song of Solomon. Your lips are like a scarlet thread, and your mouth is lovely. Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate behind your veil. You have captivated my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. How beautiful is your love. Now, I think all of us in here grew up in church, and to us, that doesn't sound like Bible, right? your cheeks are lovely, your lips are like a scarlet thread, you've captivated my heart. That doesn't sound to us like Bible, because we're used to, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, which is biblical. But we really don't think of romantic poetry as being biblical. And really, it's just one book of the Bible that is all about this romantic desire. It's the book of Song of Solomon. But it almost seems a little bit awkward in a way to be talking about this, because we think of, I don't know how many of you think this way, but maybe you think of the Bible as theology, facts that you need to know about God, about ourselves, about sin, about, whatever, just theological facts. And then romance is something, maybe the Bible sort of gives you some direction on things to stay away from, but just romantic feelings are outside of what God cares about. But obviously, if there's a whole entire book of the Bible about romance, God cares about that. So it's not that God is, mad at you for liking somebody else, or that you should feel guilty for that. That's just the way that God made you. And so this book, whether it's Solomon that wrote the book or somebody else, it's obviously this romantic poetry. And the passage that I just read for you, that's a little more of the milder of the romantic poetry in the book of Song of Solomon. There's stuff in there that's a little bit, I don't know. There's stuff that's a little bit more graphic than just your lips are smooth like honey. I mean, there's stuff in there that, would kind of make you blush if you were reading it in family devotions and your mom and dad were sitting across, on the other couch. That's just the way the book of Song of Solomon is. That God included in the Bible for a reason. So whenever we read these lines, we don't think of that as biblical. We think about that more, that sounds like Shakespeare to us. But it's biblical that God created us this way. So one thing we learn from the Bible, and especially from the book of Song of Solomon, is that romantic desire is not bad. It's not shameful. Now, the Bible does tell us that there are some guidelines for how we pursue or explore that romantic desire, but that desire in itself is not bad. God created you to have that desire for someone else. So marriage and romance were part of the perfect world when God created Adam and Eve before Adam and Eve messed it up. So the Bible tells us that God created gender, he created romantic desire, he created these hormones in us. But I want to be clear about something, and we see this all over Scripture. We also see it in the book of Song of Solomon, that even though God made us this way, God created us with that desire, God also tells us that there's only one context in which acting on that pursuing that romantic desire to its logical end, there's only one context where that God has made for that, and that context is called marriage. So we see that all over the Bible, but we also see it in this book of romantic and sometimes erotic poetry, that God created marriage to be that outlet where romantic desire is pursued and where romantic desire is fulfilled. It doesn't mean that it's wrong to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, but that just means that pursuing that physical interest, that romantic interest, that's something that God created a space for that, and that space is called marriage. Now, the whole context of the book of Song of Solomon shows us this, because even though there's love poetry all the way through there, the whole, I guess if there's one theme about this romantic poetry, it's that they're anticipating marriage. They're looking forward to marriage. So you read these poems, and some of them were written before the couple gets married. And so they're talking about how, my desire is to be with you. My desire is for you. And they say it in all these poetic ways that, I'm longing for the day that we can be together. And then some of the poems were written sort of like around the wedding night and beyond, where the marriage is consummated. But the whole context of the book of Song of Solomon is that they are anticipating marriage, and that they see marriage in a biblical way, that's the space where God has created for this romantic desire to be pursued. And there's a line that's repeated 3 times in the book, pretty much word for word. The book is only 8 chapters long, but 3 times in the book it says this: "Do not stir up or awaken love until the appropriate time. Now that's a modern translation. The older translations say, don't awaken love until it desires or something like that, or until it pleases. But that would be a modern paraphrase of that. Don't awaken love. 3 times in the book, it says, do not stir up or awaken love until the appropriate time. So, in other words, what God wants to remind us from the book of Song of Solomon is that romantic love, marriage is a beautiful thing. It's nothing that it should be thought of as dirty or shameful, especially for Christians, since God is the one that created it. But there's one specific space where God has created that romantic love to be pursued, and that's marriage. Now, here's how. So let's go back to the movies, music, and books. Okay, so just in popular culture, or in just you talking with your friends, or things that you hear people say, or things that you see people post on Instagram, in general American culture, this is how most people view romance. Most people view it as there's this thing called marriage, and there's this thing called sex, and there's this thing called children, having children. And those are 3 separate entities, 3 separate paths, and you should pursue whatever of those paths you might want to at any particular time. So, maybe you would really love to have children. Well, you don't really have to get married to do that. And with IVF, you don't really have to have sex to do that. So you can just pursue that one path. Or, if you want to just act on that sexual desire, it's not important that you're married. Don't worry about, the children that God might give you. That's just another path that you can choose if you want to. And so I think in popular culture, the way I see it, marriage, sex, and having children they're not even related. You can pursue one without the other. You can have one or 2 or none if you want to, and that's okay. But when we look at the Bible, how the Bible talks about those 3 things, they're not 3 different paths that you may pursue at some point if you want to, if you like to. And if you want to pursue the marriage route, that's fine, but it might not work out. So don't go into it thinking that it's going to last forever. When we look at the biblical view of all that, all of those 3 things are part of the same package. It's when the Bible talks about sexuality in the good and in the proper way, it talks about it in the context of marriage. And when it talks about having children, it's in the context of the biological father and the biological mother, or their adopted children. It talks about the family unit, 2 people who are married to each other and God blesses them with children. So even though our culture might tell us that those are 3 things that you can choose in whichever order or whichever way you want to, the Bible puts all those 3 together in the same gift. And so, you might think that whenever you hear somebody say you should wait until marriage, you might think that that's part of a culture that is already dead and gone. That nobody does that anymore. Nobody lives that way. We're in 2020. We're in a different culture. And so the Bible might say that, but of course the Bible was talking to people back in the 1800s. It wasn't talking about people today. And so you might think that way, or you might think that, romantic love and romantic desire, whenever 2 people get married, the romance is dead. So you might as well just enjoy it right now. But when we look at the biblical view of romance, sex, marriage, having children, the Bible talks about that as one gift. Now, of course, there are people who can't have children. I'm not saying that God gives that gift to everybody, but the Bible talks about those 3 things as being kind of like a package deal. So if God could speak to you right now just on the subject of your romantic feeling for someone else, your desire to be with someone else of the opposite sex, that desire that's growing in you, if God could just sum up His word to you on this, and if He could just speak to you in an audible voice, I believe He would say, listen, I have this wonderful gift that I've already created you with. I've already created you with gender and with hormones and romantic desires, and I want to give you this gift of sexual fulfillment, but I want to give it to you in the context of marriage. It's the only context where where God is pleased with it, where it's not shameful, it's not dirty, it's not sinful. It's something that the Bible talks about and the Bible blesses. And so I think God would say to you, I want to give you this gift, and I want you to just trust me on this, that the only context where it works right, the only context where all of that can be explored to your heart's desire, that the only context for that is marriage. And we might think that God's just trying to keep us from a life of fun, or that God is, outdated or something like that. But whenever we look at all those issues from a biblical perspective, we see that it's a wonderful gift that God has given humanity. He's given us the gift of marriage, which includes romantic desire and all of that. And he wants you, if that's your desire, to pursue marriage. Not right now. I don't want you to go out and get married right now. But God has created a context for that, a space for that, and it's called marriage. So that's really a lot of what the Song of Solomon is about. It's a lot of romantic and sometimes erotic love poetry written from fiance to fiance as they anticipate marriage, as they anticipate the wedding night. But then there's also this reminder: don't awaken love until the appropriate time. So there's a time that's not appropriate and a time that is appropriate. Now, I know that in this kind of setting, if I were to open it up and if I were to say, hey, does anybody have any questions, nobody would say anything, because it's probably been like some of the most awkward 20 minutes you've ever experienced in Lighthouse. But I do want you to know that desire is okay. Now, God has created very distinct boundaries for the exploration of that desire, but it's something he created you with, and that's okay. And if you ever have any question that you'd like to ask privately or anonymously, that's fine with me. I'll try to answer it in as good a way as I can according to the Bible. But that's what the book of Song of Solomon is about: romance and marriage, and the appropriate place for all of that that you're wired to want and to desire. So, a very short book. It doesn't seem like it fits into the Bible, but it does. So I'm not even going to say, are there any questions, because nobody's going to say anything. But anyway, so I'll turn it over now to my beloved.